do two chapters tonight. But this one I don't want to rush through because it is so good. And again, remember, if you are an adult child, it's never too late. If you're an adult who's never learned the boundaries, it is never too late. But of all of the areas in which boundaries are crucially important, obviously we know it is in child rearing. It's in raising our babies, raising our children, because how you and I approach boundaries and child rearing will have an enormous impact on the character of our kids. And how many of us want to have kids who grow up having character? I know I definitely. It also will help on how they develop values in their lives, on how well they do in school. Who would ever think that boundaries would help a kid in school? But it does. It helps not only socially, but also with their work. On the friends that they pick. How many of you want your kids or your grandkids to pick the right friends? Friends are essential. I will tell you guys that my son Josiah, all throughout high school, he made straight A's, and he was a good kid, never got into a day of trouble, and then chose to hang around with the wrong crowd. The wrong crowd is essential to not go there. And we want to teach our kids how to not hang out with the wrong crowd. How many of you care who your kids marry? Because then they become a part of your family, right? And how well they do in a career. Don't we all want to have a career where we're super successful? So the Bible, all throughout the Bible, from cover to cover, it talks about the importance of family. And God at his core is a lover, isn't he? For any of you who are in a relationship with him, you know. In 1 John 4:8, it says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So God is relational. He wants connection with us from the time we're conceived in the womb until the time we go to the tomb, and then we're going to be with him forever. In Jeremiah 31:3, it says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. So his love never wanes, ever, ever, ever. He can never love you any more or any less than he does right now. His love is eternal. And God's love, thank goodness, is not passive. His love is active in our lives. And he wants a universe filled with loving people who love him, and not only love him. So it goes this way. Not only does he want us to love him, he wants us to love one another. And the family is the social unit that God invented to fill up the world with representatives of his loving character. It's a place for nurturing and developing babies until they are mature enough to go out on their own as adults, and then, of course, have families of their own, but multiply and in his image and in their surroundings. So the body of Christ is much like the family unit. The Bible refers to the church body as a body. You guys all know what I'm talking about? Each of us have different parts. So the church body is super essential and often described as a family. The biblical portrayal of God helps show us how parenting is such a vital part of bringing God's own character to this planet in our little kids. Amazing to think that, isn't it? So God our Father wants each and every one of us to grow up, to become mature, to attain the whole measure of the fullness of Christ, according to Ephesians 4:13. And part of the maturing process is helping us know how to take responsibility for our lives. How many of you were taught from a really young age how to take responsibility for your life? A few. That's amazing. That's very, very cool. Good deal. Yeah. Yeah. So our children need to know what they are responsible for and what they aren't responsible for. If we're not taught this, we end up taking on responsibilities that aren't ours, or the opposite. And so we have to understand we have to not only as parents understand, but then train our children what they are responsible for and what they are not. Because responsibility is a gift. It's an enormous gift. It's a valuable gift. And we all know, or we are, one or the other, either you know or you are, people who have the boundaries of an 18-month-old. Meaning they sulk and they throw temper tantrums and they scream and they yell, and I don't like this, or I'm going to ignore you, or they go silent, or they run away from you, or they throw themselves on the floor, or the opposite, and they just comply with others just in order to have peace. I'm just going to go along with the flow. So we don't want either of those, do we? So a wise mother will develop boundaries in her children by teaching them responsibility, by teaching them limit setting, and delay in gratification. You guys, we live in a culture, and I'll just call it this, a microwave culture. We want it now, don't we? I mean, look, we have cell phones at our fingertips. The ones of you that are older in the room, you guys remember before cell phones when our phones were connected to a wall and a cord? And you answered the phone when you could, when you were home, and that was if you were inside, because most of the time you're outside playing, right? But now it's like, now, I want it now. Why didn't you answer your phone? Why aren't you at my house? People want everything now, but a part of learning boundaries is learning a delay of gratification, and it's always for something better. So just remember that. You're delaying for something better. And we know that if we start early with our kids, that they grow up and learn boundaries and go through life way easier than those of us who were never, ever taught boundaries and are learning them at an older age. It's exponentially harder, isn't it? The older ones of us that are learning. Exponentially hard. It's like learning a brand new language, which I started off with telling you guys at the beginning of this class. For me, it was like learning a new language because I never understood boundaries. I was never taught boundaries. So it's better if we start kids early. As we teach them the merits and limits of responsibility, we teach them autonomy. Everyone know what autonomy is? It is the right of self-government. Listen, if God wanted robots, he would not have given us our own free choice. He didn't want that. He created each and every one of us to want and to desire autonomy. And when we cross someone's boundaries, do you know what we do? We take away their right of self-government. It's called enmeshment. We go into their world where we don't belong. And God created us to where we want autonomy. And that's what we should be training our kids. We prepare them to take on the tasks of adulthood. So the biblical word for boundary or limit setting is discipline. Did you guys know that? Discipline. Sometimes we have been raised to think that discipline is a bad word. I'm going to tell you what a bad word is. Punishment. God took away the punishment, and he left us with discipline. So let's look at two different aspects of discipline. The first one is the positive aspect of discipline. Here they are: proactivity, prevention, and instruction. So positive discipline is sitting your child down and having a conversation, which, you guys, listen, if you're not sitting down with your children and having a conversation, the world is. It is speaking really, really loud. It's speaking through their devices. It's speaking through the television. It's speaking through fellow children at school. It is speaking. It is essential that your kids learn from you. Otherwise, they will learn values that just don't go with the Word of God, and it'll give them a lot to overcome later. So we need to have conversations with our kids. We need to educate them, and we need to train them, not only in the way to go, but also in tasks and in everything essential to life. Don't leave it up to the phone to teach your kids. And I know our kids have a phone in their hand from the time they're babies now, but don't let the phone be the teacher. You be the teacher as the parent, okay? So this is called positive. This is the positive aspect of discipline. It's called positive discipline. Then there's the negative facet of discipline. And the negative facet is correction, chastisement, and consequences. So negative discipline is letting the child suffer the results of their actions to learn a lesson in responsibility. Good parenting involves both preventative training and practice and correctional consequences. So we have to have both aspects. We have to have the positive and we have to have the negative together. So he gives an example. Here's the house rules in our house. At 10 o'clock, lights out, everybody goes to bed. Your 14-year-old decides, and you tell that your 14-year-old, listen, I want you to be fresh for school. I want you to have a good brain. I want you to be able to wake up early in the morning, so lights out at 10 o'clock. And your 14-year-old says, I don't want to do that. I want to stay up until 11:30. So you've already educated them, right? You've already trained them in the way that you want them to go, and they don't go by it. So, okay, you don't go to bed until 11:30, but the next day, because you didn't go to bed on time last night, you can't have your phone and your computer today. Because listen, a 14-year-old can't pay for their own phone and computer, right? So who pays for it? Right. So by them not going by the house rules, discipline says you have to reap the consequences, and here is the consequences. And that teaches them next time, all right, is it worth it to me in order to lose my phone and the computer? Is it worth it to me to stay up until 11:30? If they decide it's worth it, then they'll continue on. But if they decide the pain is too much, they'll be like, no, I'm going to go to bed when the house rules calls for it. Yesterday, I got to pick up my grandbaby from school. It was my daughter's birthday, and she came out. She was so sad, and Rue is she has words to her feelings, to her emotions. And she says, Mimi, I'm so sad I got a yellow today. And I said, oh, baby, why did you get a yellow? And she said, because I didn't obey the teacher. And I said, oh, so what does that mean? And she says, that means that when I go to your house, I can't have your phone, which I don't give her my phone. I can't have your phone and I can't watch TV. And I said, oh, okay, babe. I said, well, what does that make you want to do tomorrow? And she said, it makes me want to obey my teacher. You see, she's learned that she doesn't like those consequences. So tomorrow, she's going to decide to obey the teacher when the teacher tells her something to do. And that's called corrective discipline. That's called appropriate discipline. So why are both positive and negative disciplines necessary in good boundary development? Because God uses practice, trial, and error to help us grow up. You see, a lot of religion doesn't teach you this. A lot of religion teaches you that if you better practice and get it perfect, because if you mess up, you're danged, you're cast down, you're condemned. But that's not what the Word of God says. And God doesn't do that. We learn maturity in getting information. A lot of times we apply it poorly and we make mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes and we do better at it next time. I'm not talking about living a life of sin, living a life of eating dirt, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about practicing and failing sometimes and saying, I don't like those consequences. That hurt. So I'm going to learn. I'm going to stand back up and I'm going to go again. And I'm not going to do that again because I don't like those consequences. And God lets us do that, right? So practice is necessary in all areas of our life. Practice is important in learning boundaries and in learning responsibility. Our mistakes, believe it or not, they are our teachers. Did you know that? Those things that you've been trying to hide, those things that you don't tell anybody about, those things that, I could not possibly be honest with you and tell you that I made a mistake. Wrong. Your mistakes are your teachers, and people need to see what you do with your mistakes. That's why I live my life out loud. A lot of people don't, and that's okay. If you're a private person, no shade cast on you. But I prefer to live my life out loud because I make mistakes, and people need to see what I do with them. People need to say, okay, are you learning? Are you growing? Are you taking the next step, even if you make another mistake? Because that's how we grow up, right? That's how our kids grow up too. So discipline is an external boundary designed to develop internal boundaries in our kids. Did everyone get that? Okay, good. So that's what discipline is. It's an external that does a work on the internal of our kiddos. Or if you're an adult learning it, same thing. It provides a structure of safety until children have enough structure in their character not to need it. And it's the same for us adults who are learning this also. So good discipline always, 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 always moves a child toward more internal structure and more responsibility, not away from. So if you have bad boundaries, the kid ends up being more irresponsible. If you have good boundaries, the kid ends up being more responsible. Okay? All right, so what's the difference in discipline and punishment? Punishment is a payment for doing wrong, paying the penalty for breaking the law. It isn't a great teacher because the price is way too high. Punishment doesn't leave much room for mistakes, does it? In fact, it leaves no room for mistakes whatsoever. But discipline is the natural law of God. Our actions reap consequences. So then obviously we begin thinking about our actions, right? If we know that we're going to reap consequences and we have to walk through those consequences, we begin thinking about, wait a minute, I'm not going to say that next time because I have to reap what I just said. I'm not going to step there next time because I have to reap. Whereas if you're terrified and punished, what do? You hide. You feel condemned. You feel danged. And so it makes you not even want to try anymore. It takes that inner motivation all the way out of you. But discipline does the exact opposite of it. It says, I'm going to do better next time. So discipline is different than punishment because God is finished punishing us. No more punishment for us. It ended on the cross to all those who accept Christ as their Savior. So punishment will always look back, and it focuses on making payment for wrong done in the past. You can tell when people have no boundaries because when you make a mistake, they want to punish you. They want to continue bringing up your past over and over and tell this person and tell that person and tell this person and tell that person. That's someone who has absolutely no boundaries and also doesn't understand the love of the Father because that was paid for. That was paid for. We no longer have to look backwards. We no longer have to keep playing that script over and over and over and over. And I'm no good. I'm this. I'm that. You know what that causes? It causes shame, and shame makes all of us hide. It makes us not be real. And then we get to be 48 years old and wonder who we are if we're living in that mode. None of us want to do that. So Christ's suffering, you guys, was sufficient. His death, burial, and resurrection was sufficient. It paid the punishment. But discipline looks forward. The lessons we learn from discipline help us not make the same mistakes again. So remember, God always, always, always disciplines us for good in order that we may share in His holiness. Isn't that beautiful? This helps us because we can make mistakes without fear of judgment and loss of relationship. If you make a mistake, Christian, you're not separated from God. You fell down, and He's right there waiting to pick you back up and say, now you have to reap those consequences. He's not going to save you from the consequences, but He doesn't withdraw from you. Once you are saved and born again, this connection never wanes, ever. So when you make a mistake, He doesn't leave your side. And some of us parents need to understand that when we're raising our children and giving them discipline. And we're going to go into that tonight. But if you break off from if you discipline them and remove your love from them, do you know what you're doing? You're punishing them. And punishment looks backwards, and punishment does no good, and punishment gives them no internal structure to strive forward. None. So just remember that as we're going through this. So the only danger in making mistakes now is the consequences, not isolation, not the loss of love. So he gives an example of a mother saying, I'll never stop loving you. That is a constant in my heart. However, if you smart off again, you'll lose your privileges for 3 days. That's the appropriate way to speak to our children, as opposed to smart off again and I won't love you anymore. Smart off again and I can't stand you. That's completely inappropriate. Okay, so let's look. What's that? Very true. Very true. Absolutely. Okay. Yes, true. Okay, so let's look at the boundary needs of children. What boundaries do kids need? Number one, they need self-protection. So God designed newborns, of course we know, to connect deeply with mom and dad or the caregiver, knowing without their care, the baby will not survive. So when a baby is an infant, that baby has to have constant care. And that's what lets them be able to internalize that they are safe. It gets them bonded and have a secure attachment. Now, if you didn't have that when you were a baby, what does your internal structure look like? Yes, that's a great way of saying that. Okay, just so everyone understands that. So the time and energy that a parent, mom and daddy, caregiver gives to that baby, it translates into that baby as attachment, and the child learns that the world is a safe place to be. Some of us are learning that at an older age, and that's okay. Again, it's okay. It's never too late. Don't worry. But mom and dad cannot always be there as they grow up, but they always need to feel safe and grow up to protect themselves. They need to learn to say no. They need to learn to tell the truth, and they need to take on the responsibility of self-protection. Boundaries are our way of protecting and safeguarding our souls. So in other words, it's our way of keeping the good in and keeping the bad out. Okay, he gives an example so that we'll understand this. 2 boys, Jack and Tyler, both of them raised in a Christian household, but have very different upbringings. Same scenario, both of these boys are offered pot. They go to school and they're offered pot. Jack comes home and he says, "Hey, Mom, hey, Dad, the kids today, they offered me pot and said that I was lame when I said no. If they can't like me because I don't smoke pot, I guess they aren't my friends." This is a family who had taught their son boundaries. Tyler comes home, the other boy, he comes home with red eyes and slurred speech, high as a kite, denying it, and finally blurting out, "Well, everybody's doing it." A hallmark for Jack's family was permission to disagree. Permission to disagree. So if Jack ever fought his parents about bedtime, they never withdrew and they never punished him for disagreeing. So get this. He could disagree. You're going to go to bed at 10. Well, I want to go to bed at 11:30. You're not going to be punished for saying you want to go to bed at a different time. Okay? But if you don't submit to the 10 o'clock, then there's going to be consequences. Does everyone understand that? So in other words, don't be stupid. You need to be in bed by 10 o'clock. I can't believe you're so dumb. You just need to listen to me. You know what that raises? It raises a compliant that goes to school and is offered pot and takes pot because they have no ability within them, in their structure, of disagreeing with mom and dad and saying, "Well, I want to go to bed at 11:30. Okay? Makes sense to everybody? Instead, they would listen to his reasonings, and if it seemed appropriate, they changed their minds. And if not, they would maintain their boundaries. So it's a Friday night. Mom and Dad, I know that 10 o'clock is my bedtime, but it's a Friday night, and I actually don't have anything to do first thing in the morning. Is there any way I could stay up until 11:30? You know what? You reasoned that out. Yes, absolutely. We'll change the rule tonight. So either that or, no, son, we're going to get up in the morning and we're going to rake the yard or whatever, and I would prefer you to go to bed at 10 o'clock. If he chooses not to, then tomorrow he has consequences, stuff taken away from him. But Jack was also given a vote in some of the family matters. Family night out. Hey, I want to say where we're going to go tonight. All right, let's take a vote. They would listen to his opinion on what they should do. So, was this a family with no limits? Absolutely not. On the contrary, it was a family who took boundary setting seriously as a skill to develop in their children. When Jack was little, his dad allowed him to practice boundaries. He would wrestle with him on the floor, and as soon as Jack would reach his limit and say, "Stop," Dad would stop and respect his limit. And we have to do the same thing. When he got tired, he could immediately say, "The pain needs to stop," and Dad would stop. Jack learned when he was scared or in discomfort or wanted to change things that he could say no. So when he gets older, and people, let's say it's a ring of gossip. Jack goes into the ring of gossip and he doesn't like what's being said. He knows if he removes himself from the ring of gossip that they're probably going to talk about him. But he has these internal structures built in him that it doesn't matter. He is allowed to say, I'm not participating in this. I'm stepping out of this ring. No is no. Make sense to everybody? And you know what that does is it saves him. It saves him from getting caught up in the whirlwind of drug addiction or of gossip or of all the things that people want to try to drag you into. He had the internal structure. Nope. Out means out. I'm not participating in that. Okay. So Jack had years of practice of resisting. You guys, if you're an adult, you're also going to have years of practice of resisting. It doesn't change. You know, the scenarios might change. It might not be that people are offering you pot, or it might be that people are offering you pot. I don't know. But scenarios change with adult things, but you're never going to stop having the ability to practice every single day. Practice this over and over. And remember, if you make a mistake, you practice, you make a mistake, learn from it. Document it. In the Bible, it talks about building altars. Build an altar in your mind. Build an altar on a piece of paper. Journal on a piece of paper and say, this is how I was feeling when I did this and I reaped these consequences. That way you can look back and say, I'm not doing that again. You know, somebody comes and offers you pot again and you say, I remember that time when I took pot and it led me to do this and this and this. No is the answer. So begin developing these within you, even if you're an adult. Begin to develop these. So he knew he could disagree. Jack knew he could disagree with people who were important to him without losing their love. Listen, if you disagree with someone and lose their love, that is no reflection on you. If you do something that makes somebody mad enough to completely withdraw their love from you, that is not your problem to own. Everyone get that? Okay, all right. So, he did not fear abandonment in standing up against his friends. It took him out of his helpless or compliant position, or let me say it this way, it took him out of being slave to people and people's opinion, and it put him where he needed to be. It gave him internal boundaries. He would say no without receiving a hurt or angry response or a manipulative countermove. But that's not to say once he got out of the home, he wouldn't get manipulation, right? Don't we? But by that time, he had so much built inside of him, an internal structure, it didn't rock him. It didn't rock his world. He was able to disagree with people. Jack learned that his boundaries were good and that he could use them to protect himself. He learned to resist the things that were not good for him. So that's called keeping the bad out, keeping the good in, which is what boundaries do to us. Okay, what about poor Tyler? Doggone it. He had completely different response. He got high. He did the pot. His mom would be hurt and withdraw from him, and she would pout like an 18-month-old would do, and then she would send guilt messages to him. His dad would get angry, and his dad would threaten him. He'd say, don't talk back to me or else, which a lot of us were raised that way, right? I will slap you, I will spank you, I will bodily harm to you, get out of my sight, all of these reactions. The difference between boundaries is boundaries respond. They do not react. But poor Tyler, he came from a reactive family. It did not take long for Tyler to become externally compliant. Say yes on the outside, but what was he doing on the inside? He may have been sitting down on the outside, but he was standing up on the inside. He was just shoving it all down. Whenever he thought about a subject, dinner menu, social media restrictions, church activities, clothes, curfews, hair, he stuffed deep down inside. And one day, Tyler tried to resist his mother's hug, and she immediately withdrew and used her words to push him away. She said to him, one day you'll feel sorry for hurting my feelings like that. Day by day, Tyler was being trained not to set limits. Tyler seemed to be content and he seemed to be respectful, but teenage years show what kind of character has actually been built into our children or into us. Tyler folded and gave in to his friend's pressure. So resentment and the years of not having boundaries were eroding the compliant. He may have been easy to live with. He had a false self, and the only reason that he had a false self is because he had to learn a false self in order to survive. He had to be compliant. He had to go along with the family rules in order to survive. And how many of you know when you're little, you'll do whatever it takes to survive, right? So it's our job as parents to teach them that it is okay. It is okay to have an opinion about things. Number 2, taking responsibility for one's own need. How many in the room were responsible for either an alcoholic parent, a narcissistic parent, a parent who didn't take any? How many of you were responsible for your parent from the time you were very young? Okay, good. So that's what this is. So there was a group therapy session, and the leader posted this question: what do you need? Now, if I were to go around this room and I were to ask you guys about your friend next to you, and if I were to ask you, what do they need? I think you guys could probably pop off 10 things. Well, they need love, and they need this, and they need this, they need this, they need this, they need this, they need this. But what do you need? Janice was confused, and she began thinking. Her husband had already made moves to separate, and her children were out of control, and her job was in jeopardy. Her life was a train wreck. And this was the question that was asked to her: what do you need? She didn't know. She had no idea, because she spent her childhood taking the responsibility of her parents' feelings. When mom freaks out, when mom gets angry, when mom gets mad, what does a child do? It's okay. Don't get mad. They internalize, and they take responsibility for mom's feelings or dad's feelings. How many of you know that is not a child's job? It is not your child's job to take on your bad feelings. You have to own your feelings, and so does the child. But she smoothed over ruffled feathers with statements like this: Mom, I'm sure that Dad didn't mean to blow up at you like that. The result was over-responsibility toward her family and a lack of attainment toward her own needs. How many of you know that when you grow up and you've taken on other people's feelings and other people's needs your whole entire life, you have a little girl screaming inside of you that needs. Let's just end there, that needs. And oftentimes we project and we transfer onto other people because we have no idea how to meet those needs, no clue how to get those needs met. Janice had a radar for the hurts of others, but she never pointed that radar internally to herself. So she didn't understand her own God-given, legitimate needs: love, acceptance, worth, and safety. She didn't understand them. She didn't have a vocabulary for that type of thinking. And how many of you know when you don't know what your needs are and you're constantly trying to meet other people's needs, you literally become their slave and they are your master? Any mood fluctuation they have, any hurt they have, you have to be their answer. And you guys, you were never, ever made to be someone's answer. You were never made to take on that responsibility. That is individual's responsibility alone. So one member of the group spoke out and said, if I were in your shoes, I'd really need to know that the person in the room cared for me and didn't see me as a colossal, shameful failure, and that you'd pray for me and let me call you for support. Something about those words of support touched her deep down inside of her, in a place that she couldn't touch herself. Then she allowed the comfort that comes from others who had been comforted to take place inside of her. So the story demonstrates the second fruit of boundary development in our children: the ability to take ownership of or responsibility for our own needs. God intends for us to know or have a vocabulary for when we're hungry, when we're lonely, when we're in trouble, when we're overwhelmed, when we need a break, and then to take initiative to get what we need. When we're projecting, let's say that I feel burned out, and instead of taking initiative to, you know what, tomorrow I need to lighten my load just a little bit, and I might have to cancel a couple of appointments because that's what a mature, growing adult does, right? But when you're not taking that, when you're not understanding how you need to own this, you know what I will do? I will project that and say, I'm so busy, I don't even know what to do, and I'm getting so burnt out, and all these stupid people, and I put all of that garbage onto you. Isn't that crazy? We've got to own our own lives, every part of them. So our limits create a spiritual and an emotional space, a separateness between ourselves and others. And this allows our needs to be heard and to be understood. A lot of times when people are feeling rejected, do you know what they do? Instead of going to, so let's say that I was feeling rejected by Jason, instead of going to Jason and saying, I am so fearful, I feel like we might not be as close as we were. Can we go for a walk or can we have a date night? Do you know what we normally do? I'm going to reject him so I can get his attention, because manipulation and control always work. Talk about a horrible, horrible way to live. But you know we all do it. We feel abandoned, so we abandon. We project and we transfer instead of owning our own stuff. And then having a vocabulary for, Rami, are you mad at me? I feel like maybe you might be mad at me. Going to people in truth. I fear a loss of relationship. And he can tell me, no, Marie, I'm not mad. Or, yeah, you know what? Let's talk about such and such and so and so. That's how we progress forward, is be responsible. If you have a need, tell somebody your need. Don't transfer all your garbage onto them or reject them or whatever your issue might be. So when children can be taught to express their own needs as opposed to the needs of others, they are given a genuine advantage in life. When a child can express their own needs, instead of going and saying, Daddy, Mama is upset or Mama's mad, going and saying, Daddy, I feel hurt. I feel scared. Will you hold me? It's such a beautiful thing to give a language to our needs. How can a parent help their child experience their own individual needs? I love this. The best thing that a parent can do is to encourage verbal expression of their needs, even when they don't go with the family flow. Even when they don't go with the family flow. When children have permission to ask for something that goes against the flow, even though they may not receive it, they develop a sense of what they need. Okay, here's a big one that a lot of you were not trained with. Allow them to talk about their anger. Allow them to express their grief, to express their loss, to express their sadness without trying to cheer them up or talk them out of their feelings. Why is it, and we do this as adults all the time, when someone is hurting, why do we want to talk them out of hurting? Why do we want to talk them out of just being right there present in the moment and going through it? A lot of times because we don't allow ourselves to go through the process. We don't allow ourselves to go through a grieving process or a learning process, and we think that everybody needs to be up all the time. That's not the case, you guys. There's going to be times when you're going to feel grief, right? There's going to be times when you're going to feel pain, and we need to normalize that. It's okay. It's okay if you feel pain. You don't have to numb. You don't have to check out. You don't have to shove it down deep inside of you. I'll come and sit by you while you're going through your pain. I'll come and sit down by you while you're going through your grief. I'll come and sit down by you while you express to me your anger. But you know what we do as parents? Stop acting like that. You're embarrassing me. There's no reason for you to be sad. Get happy. Put a happy face on. How about we let them be real? And then after they've expressed all this, you know, the chances are, if you're the influence and if you're the example, they're going to let you speak into them once they ask you for it. Okay, encourage them to ask questions and not assume that your words are the equivalent to Scripture. This takes a really secure person to do this, for sure. Ask them what they are feeling when they seem isolated or distressed. What are you feeling right now? Let me ask you guys that are sitting in this room. Has anybody ever asked you how you're feeling? Oh, that's good. That's awesome. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that that I know of. Anyone's asked you how you feeling? How you feel about that, Rami? How you feeling? A lot of times we don't want to know. We want people to know what we're feeling, but we don't ask people how they're feeling. When they seem isolated or distressed, help them put words to their negative feelings. Do not try to keep things light for a false sense of cooperation and family closeness. Let your kids know it's okay to talk about deep things. It's okay to talk about things that hurt them. It's okay to feel grief in the moment. It's okay to feel loss in the moment. They don't have to put on a false sense in order to make you happy. So the first aspect of taking ownership over one's own needs is to identify the need. That's where our spiritual radar comes in. And Janice's was broken and underdeveloped, and a lot of ours is also. But God's going to develop them, don't worry. The second aspect of taking ownership is to initiate responsible caretaking for ourselves, as opposed to placing the burden on someone else. You guys, don't place the burden on someone to be a mind reader. Well, you should have known what I was feeling. You should have known how I was acting. Don't do that. You take responsibility and you put words to what you need. And you go to someone that you trust. You go to your safe person and express your needs to them. And that's called ownership. That's called owning your own life. We must allow our children to experience the painful consequences of their own irresponsibility and mistakes. This is the training of Hebrews 5:14. It says, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And then discipline of Hebrews 12:4-11 talks about the legitimate children of God. If you're a legitimate children of God, he'll discipline you. You guys know that portion of scripture. So by the time they're ready to leave home, our children should have internalized a deep sense of personal responsibility for their lives. Their convictions, I'll go over these really fast. Their convictions should be, my success or failure in life largely depends on who? It depends on me. Though I am to look to God and others for comfort and instruction, I alone am responsible for my choices. Your choices should not affect my choices. I can make my choices all on my own. Though I am deeply affected by my significant relationships throughout my life, I cannot blame my problems on anyone but myself. Though I always fail and I need support, I can't depend on some over-responsible individual to constantly bail me out spiritually, emotionally, financially, and relationally. Listen, if someone is bailing you out in all these areas constantly, spiritually, emotionally, financially, and relationally, if they're not making you own, or if they're not putting up that boundary to where you own your own life, they're enmeshing. They're crossing your boundary. If they're constantly fixing everything for you and becoming Superman in your life, they're crossing your boundary. You need to see where you end and where they end or begin, and where they end and you begin. Okay? We won't stand before God and say, but God, I came from a dysfunctional family. It's all their fault. We're not going to do that. That doesn't fly with God. We may have been deeply influenced. All you adults in the room that never have learned boundaries and are just learning them, we probably were deeply influenced. That's probably the case. But we're ultimately responsible for what we do. And we're responsible for our own immature souls. No one else is responsible for them. So wise parents allow their children to undergo safe suffering, age-appropriate consequences. I'm going to skip on down because we don't have a lot of time. We're going to go to the third boundary. The third boundary need of a child is having a sense of control and choice. Cute little Chloe, she was 11 years old, and oh, you guys aren't going to like this one, but her daddy had been doing some boundary work. He had learned that he was not going to react, that he was going to respond. And Chloe says, I won't go to the dentist, and you can't make me. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you guys. If one of my kids would have said that, yeah, they would have been drugged into the car and buckled in, told to be quiet. That's just how it would have gone. But he had learned not to react. He had learned to respond. And remember, Chloe's life is Chloe's life, right? She needs to take responsibility. So he said, you're absolutely right, sweetheart. I cannot make you go. So he didn't withdraw from her. He didn't tell her, you're being such a little brat. What's wrong with you? He didn't withdraw. He says, you're absolutely right. I cannot make you go. But just remember that if you choose not to go, you are also choosing not to go to the party tomorrow night. I will certainly respect either decision that you make. Shall I cancel your appointment? Little Chloe thinks about it. She says, well, I'll go, but not because I have to. She was right. She didn't have to, but she was going to reap the consequences if she didn't go. So children need a sense of control and choice. And if you're an adult child, the same goes for you. You need a sense of control and choice in your life. They need to see themselves as not dependent and helpless pawns of anyone else. Children, their parents, and if you're an adult, of anybody else. But as choosing, willing, initiative-taking agents of their own lives. But anxious, well-meaning parents attempt to prevent their children from making painful decisions. They shield them from falling down. And remember, what causes us to grow and mature? Practicing, falling down, getting back up, practicing, falling down, getting back up. So they prevent them, and they say, let me decide what is best for you. It's a sad state of affair because the result that you get is an atrophied child that grows up into an atrophied adult, and it's exponentially harder to develop and definitely not look like, when you have no boundaries, we are not image bearers, are we? Because God has boundaries. So we grow up into these things that we're like, oh, Lord, I don't want to be here. And then we have to start the growing process. So children need a sense that their lives and destinies are largely theirs to determine within the province of God's sovereignty. This helps them weigh decisions instead of avoiding decisions. When you're a child, you want to avoid making a decision, don't you? But we can't. We have to make decisions. We have to do the hard work. They learn to appreciate the consequence of choices made rather than resenting the choice made for them. Number 4, boundary need of a child, delay of gratification of goals. The word now obviously was made for young children and our current generation. It's where they live. Try telling a 2-year-old that they cannot have dessert until tomorrow. Yes, I bought these popsicles, but you're not eating them till tomorrow. What will a 2-year-old do? Absolutely. So newborns, as we know, they don't have the capacity to understand later, but as they get older, they definitely understand. A delay of gratification is delaying good for a better good. It's the ability to say no to our impulses, no to our wishes, and no to our desires for some gain down the road. Right now I'm doing what they call delay, don't deny, and it's an eating program, and it's where you delay for hours what you would normally eat. You don't deny yourself, but you delay. So it's called delayed gratification. So you delay it until one certain part of the day, a 2-hour block of the day, and then you can eat whatever you want. And it's honestly, it's great. It's called intermittent fasting. I don't know if you guys have heard of it or not, but it's this process right here. And it causes you to have to deny those impulses, because I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but we have an impulse to grab a piece of candy. We'll grab it, put it in our stick in our mouth. We have an impulse to go drink a Coke or to stop by Circle K. We'll go and get a Coke from Circle K, even if it is bad for us. But when you have internal boundaries, you deny those impulses, you deny those wishes, and you deny those desires for something better down the road. And Jesus, of course, is our example. He said, for the joy that was set before him, he underwent the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the Father. Who was the joy that was set before Jesus? We were. So he was able to attain us by him dying on the cross. But the skill comes after the first year of a child's life. After a year, dessert comes after carrots, and you have to tell your child that. This skill built can prevent a child from becoming an adult who is broken, who is chaotic, who is impulse-driven, slave to Madison Avenue, meaning a slave to their whims, whatever new thing that they want, a new tractor, a new car, a new house, a new this, I'll get whatever I want. I'm impulsive. I don't care if I have debt this burying me and I live in a constant state of spin. I'll go get whatever I want. It teaches them to delay that and say, no, I'm not going to get that until I have the money for it. I'm not going to go out and buy that until I have the means for it, to where it doesn't stress me out in order to keep it. Okay? So, learning how to delay gratification helps a child have a goal orientation. They learn to save time and to save money for things that are important to them. And how many of you know that we need that? All of us need that built in us. We need to it's okay to wait a little while for that new whatever until I have the means for it. Okay, number 5. The 5th boundary need of a child, and I can already tell you guys I'm not going to get through another chapter. Sorry. I really try. Number 5, boundary need of a child is respecting the limits of others. My little 5-year-old grandbaby is having such a hard time with this one. She is so good at setting boundaries and keeping boundaries, so good. But when it comes to me having boundaries, and when it comes to no, don't jump on top of Mimi, the boundaries out the door. She's learning this right now. So from an early age, children need to learn to accept the limits of parents, siblings, friends, school teachers, bosses, school friends, on and on and on and on throughout their whole entire life. They need to know that others may not always want to play with them, nor watch the same TV shows, and that needs to be okay. Others may want to eat dinner at a different restaurant than they do. That's okay. They need to know that the world does not revolve around them. I know a lot of times we were raised where the world does revolve around us, and then we get to be adults and we feel like we're invisible because the world doesn't revolve around any of us. So why is this important? Because the ability to learn to accept limits teaches us to take responsibility for ourselves. Knowing that others are not always available to us or for us helps us become inwardly directed instead of externally driven. Have you been around children who can't hear the word no? They whine and they beg and they throw tantrums and they pout until they get their way. Is this a problem? Absolutely. The longer we resist and hate others' limits, the more dependent we will be on others. So another reason why accepting the limits of others is important for kids is heeding others' boundaries helps children to love. Listen, if you are blowing over people's boundary lines, you're not loving them. If you're constantly enmeshing in somebody else's lives, even your children, you're not loving them correctly. You're not loving them as Christ loves the church. You're not being that image bearer of God when you do that. We have to respect one another's no's. Even if we don't like it, we've got to respect it. It's the basis for empathy or loving others as we would like to be loved, because I promise you, it is not good the opposite way either when someone is coming and blowing over your boundaries. We don't like that, do we? When someone constantly plows over the boundaries that we've set, it doesn't show love, does it? And it also doesn't show empathy, that they understand where we are. It shows quite the opposite. It shows that all they care about is themselves. So children need to be given the grace of having their no respected, and they need to give the same grace to others. He gives an example. He says, your child accidentally but carelessly hits you in the head with a softball. To ignore it or act like it didn't hurt is to give the child the feeling that their actions have no impact. Then the child can avoid any sense of responsibility or awareness of others' needs or hurts. But saying, I know you didn't mean to do it, but that really hurt me. Try to be a little more careful. That teaches them to respect your boundary. It helps the child see without condemning them that they actually can hurt people that they love, and that their actions absolutely do matter. If this principle is not taught, it's difficult for children to grow up as loving people. Frequently, they become self-centered and controlling. And how many of you who have fought being self-centered and controlling know how hard it is to unlearn being that way? It takes a lot of practice, doesn't it? A lot. Age-appropriate boundaries. This I'm going to fly through. And you guys can honestly, you can look this up on your own. We know birth to 5 months, you do not establish any boundaries at this time. You swaddle the baby, you hold them tight, you go to them every time they cry. A lot of people, it kills me. A lot of people think that they can train their babies at this age, and so they'll stick them in a room and let them cry for 3 hours. That demolishes their little souls. Don't do that. So 5 to 10 months, we need to help the child develop good boundaries at this time. The parent needs to encourage. Sorry, I need to switch that. The parent needs to encourage attempts at separateness while also being the anchor that the child clings to. Allow the baby to be fascinated with other people and objects other than the parent. And then 10 to 18 months. This is called the practicing stage. I told you guys last time that this is my little Revy girls. She just turned a year. This is the stage she's in. Yesterday, I had her all day, and she's so funny. She's different than Aurora. When I used to babysit Aurora, I had to go in every room with Rue, and we had to have all the lights on. And I had Rue from the time she was newborn. But this is just who she was. I had to be with her. Revy, she takes off. She goes in my dark room. And I have this big, large thing of clothes in my room, and she went behind the rack, and that's where Griffin sleeps, and she was back there with him. It took me like 20 minutes to find her. I was so scared. I was all, Revy. I go in my bathroom. I go everywhere looking for her. Revy, where are you? She's in the practicing phase. She's gone, man. She's having fun with Griffin. Finally, I get over there to him. I stick my head back there, and Griffin's all, meow, and she looks up at me like, what are you doing, Mimi? Didn't care at all. But she's in the practicing phase. So, right at this stage is when they can begin hearing the no's and understanding them and also saying them to you. Do you want another bite? No. And then you can tell them, no, don't touch that. This is when you begin teaching them the responsibility of this word no. So 18 to 36 months, the child is learning to take responsibility for a separate yet connected soul. So in this stage, there's 3 goals. Number 1 is the ability to emotionally attach to others without giving up a sense of self and one's freedom to be apart. And number 2 is the ability to say appropriate no's to others without fear of loss of love. And number 3, let me just give an example of that really quick. How about this one? Okay, it's bath time and you're going to take a bath. No, I don't want to take a bath. Okay. Just so you know, if you don't take a bath, you won't have, you won't have the movie to fall asleep to, or you won't, take away a privilege. In other words, they need to have a consequence. But at this stage, they need to be able to disagree and have their no's heard, okay? Number 3, the ability to take appropriate, I just said that one, sorry, without withdrawing emotionally. So at this stage, the child needs to learn to be autonomous, having the freedom to govern themselves. A wise parent will help their child gain a sense of individualism without losing attachment. Accept their no while maintaining your no. Choose your battles carefully according to the level of importance. Okay, 3 to 5 years. This is called the sex role development. Most children identify with the same-sex parent. They want to be like, and also they want to compete with the same-sex parent. They want to marry. At this stage, the little girls want to marry daddy. Oh, and the little boys want to marry mama. I remember my boys saying, you're going to be my wife. And I had to tell them, I absolutely think that's so precious, but I already have a husband. I would tell them that all the time because my boys wanted to marry me. And opposite, Montana loved her daddy. But they are preparing for adult roles later in life. Boundary work by parents is important here. Gently but firmly, mothers need to allow their daughters to identify and to compete. They must also deal with the possessiveness of their sons, letting them know that I know you'd like to marry mom, but mom is already married to dad. Fathers have to do the same with their sons and daughters. This helps children learn to identify with the opposite sex parent and take on appropriate characteristics. Parents who fear the budding sexuality of their children will often become critical of these intense longings. So their own fear may cause them to attack, or shame their child, causing the child to repress their sexuality. So parents, don't do that to them. Don't do that. At the other extreme, the parent is needy and will emotionally or physically seduce the child of the opposite sex, saying, "Daddy just doesn't understand, Mommy. Only you do." Don't do that. Wrong. This ensures years of confusion about their sex roles. So mature parents need a boundary between allowing sex role typing to emerge and keeping the lines clear between the parent and the child. Okay, ages 6 to 11. This is called the latency or years of industry. This is preparing for the uprooting thrust into the all lovely adolescent years. They're learning task orientation at this time through schoolwork, through play, through learning to connect with the same-sex parents. Here you need to help your kid establish the fundamentals of tasks. So in other words, they need to learn how to do their homework. They need to learn how to do their house chores, how to do their projects. They need to learn planning and how to keep at a job until it is finished. They need to learn such boundaries as delay of gratification, which we just talked about, goal orientation, and budgeting of their time. Okay, 11 to 18 years, this is the final step before adulthood, and we call this the adolescent years. It involves important steps like sexual maturation, a sense of solidifying their identity, career leanings, and love choices. The deparenting process should begin at this point. So instead of controlling your child, you influence your child. You increase their freedom as well as their responsibility. So what used to be freedom and responsibility here, you begin at this stage to increase both of them. Negotiate restrictions, limits, and consequences with them more flexibly. Thoughts of the parent go from how can I make them behave to how can I help them survive on their own. So it's kind of your mind kind of switches from one role to this next role. How can I help them survive on their own, become good adults? Teens need to be setting their own relational boundaries. They need to be scheduling boundaries, values, and money boundaries as much as possible at this age. Again, if you're an adult and you're just at this stage, it's okay. No big deal. You'll learn through it. They should suffer real-life consequences when they cross their boundary. The 17-year-old that still needs to be disciplined with social media and phone restrictions may have real problems at college in 1 year. So if they're 17 years old and you're having to discipline them and say, you spent 8 hours on social media, chances are next year when they go to college, they're going to struggle really bad. By the age of 17 years old, they need to be like, okay, I'm not going to stay on social media for 8 hours because I'm not going to have enough time to do the essential things that need to be done. So when their ability to say and hear no is deficient, clarifying house rules and consequences can often help in the last few years before the youth leaves home. So here's a few symptoms that may indicate a more serious problem. Isolation of the teen from the family members. They go and lock themselves in a room. May be a more severe problem. Depressed moods. May be a more severe problem. Rebellious behavior. Continual conflict in family. Wrong types of friends. School problems. Eating disorders. Alcohol use. Drug use. Suicidal ideas and behaviors. You know what the sad thing is this looks like some people's regular life. Some people think that this is what adolescence is supposed to look like, and it's not. Not at all. Adolescence is where they should be taking responsibility for their lives. So many parents observing these problems either react with too many boundaries or too few of boundaries. Too strict of parents risk alienating the almost adult from the home connection. Too lenient parents want to be the child's best friend. How many of you know parents that are their kids' best friend? When my kids were teenagers, I remember Josiah wanting to go to this house party, and I said, well, who's going to be there? Well, the friend's parents were going to be there. Within 2 hours, one of our friends is a cop, and she called and she said, hey, just letting you know, we're getting ready to bust this party. These parents bought these kids alcohol. They what? Their parents did. The parents had bought the children alcohol and were hosting a party at their house. Don't be your kids' best friend like that. That's just terrible. It's awful. So the teen, honestly, they need someone to respect. They do not need a best friend that's going to party with them and teach them all the wrong things. At this point, because the stakes are so high, if they are experiencing any of those symptoms, you need to consult help and get some help. All right, the different types of discipline. Didn't make it. You guys can go through that one because we are truly out of time. You guys can go through those different types of discipline on your own. I do want to say this one, though. Understand that dragging your 16-year-old into a class does not build internal motivation at all that they're going to need in 2 years, does it? A system of rewards and consequences will help them choose to go to school. So read through those. They're really good. The types of discipline, all those types of discipline are really good. But it is only when love and limits are a genuine part of the child's character that true maturity can occur. And again, maybe true maturity is going to come for you in the next few years and you're an adult. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Just make sure you're growing. Make sure you're practicing. Make sure you're doing all of these things yourself. Otherwise, we are raising compliant parrots who will, in time, self-destruct, and none of us want that, do we? Parents, we have definitely a sober responsibility, teaching our children to have an internal sense of boundary and to respect the boundaries of others. Children have the responsibility to listen and to learn. As we learn about our own boundary issues, take responsibility for them and grow. Adults, let's go first, right? All of us. So I know we're about 6 minutes over, but I want to take a little bit of time if anybody has any comments, stories, questions, if you have any. Does this challenge you? How many of you does this challenge? Does it convict you? How many of it convicts you? Does it comfort you? Knowing that we can have these internal boundaries built into us, no matter where we've come from. You guys, a lot of times we have not ever even heard of this stuff. So it needs to comfort you that God's growing us. God's teaching us this new beautiful language, and we are going to have an entire church full of healthy adults, healthy, growing, mature adults that helps the next generation become healthy, maturing, growing adults. Isn't that exciting? It truly is. Go ahead. I agree. I agree with you. So true. Yes, so true. Yes, if I would have only had this one. Yeah. Agree. I told you guys at the very first one, and I'll use it to close us out today, but if there was a 757 sitting out in the parking lot, a big Learjet, and I were to say to you guys, we're all going to go pile in, and each of us are going to take a turn driving the Learjet, and we're going to go fly to Phoenix and back. How many of you would jump in with me? Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, how many of you would jump in with Ramey? How many of you would jump in with anybody in here? We need to learn how to fly the plane, right? Otherwise, we'd all be dead. Let's just be honest. We don't know how to fly a plane. And it's the same with parenting. So that's why I'm saying give yourself a break. If you didn't know what boundaries were before, God knows I didn't, give yourself a break and understand God's growing all of us. But you do need to make the decision and make the choice. I want to grow, God. I want to practice, and I know I'm going to fail, and I know I'm going to get up going forward, and I'm going to keep growing. Amen? Amen. You guys stand with me. Let's be dismissed. Jason, will you dismiss us tonight, please?